Core Web Vitals. 3 words that are too important just removed from its first birthday. March 23rd, 2020 would mark the introduction of Core Web Vitals, a trio of metrics meant to gauge a site's health, or ultimately its user experience. Once purveyed mostly by the performance types, but after a recent announcement around the association between vitals and search rankings, the SEO community came quizzing with queries about the connection. This video, however, could not be better timed. Today is May 27th, and last night, in preparation for version 8, the Lighthouse team updated the scoring for CLS, quadrupling its value. So here to talk about Core Web Vitals in depth and breadth is Performance Protagonist, Core Vitals Cognoscenti, Barry Pollard. Enjoy.
Okay, hi, good evening if you're in my time zone, good afternoon if you're in Erie, or good morning if you're somewhere else. My name is Barry Pollard and I'm here to talk about measuring Core Web Vitals. Little bit about me, I am a software developer based in Ireland. I'm an author. I spent 2 years writing a book on HTTP2 and it was launched about 3 months after HTTP3 came out. So there you go, what can you do? I blog a lot on improving websites. I'm one of the maintainers of the HTTP archive and in particular the Web Almanac. So thanks, Henri, for the mention there. And if any of you are interested in that, please do reach out to me. I'm happy to talk about that. I am a very opinionated person. I'm going to share some of these opinions with you here now. If you actually like that for some reason, you can find me on Twitter at ChinTheWeb. I blog at www.chintheweb.com. And I can often be found hanging around the web performance Slack there, where I take up more than my fair share of time chatting there. Hold on, what's happened there? Oh, there we go. I'm here to talk about how the Core Web Vitals are measured, these mystical, magical little metrics that are getting so much attention in media at the moment. As Henri mentioned, I wrote this Smashing Magazine article, an in-depth guide to measuring Core Web Vitals, where I went through that. It is quite a long article, 34 minutes there. Henri says I can only have 15 minutes here, so we're going to race through as much as we can and probably won't cover everything. I'm also going to present it in a slightly different way, so if you did read the article, hopefully you won't be bored and hear the same thing. But if you do want more information, do find that. You can have a quick Google. There's I think a link on it at the end here, and you can delve into it at your own time. So the Core Web Vitals, I'm speaking to a web performance community group here, so I'm presuming most of you know this, so I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time talking about them, but I will give a very quick intro just to make the rest of the presentation make sense. So the Core Web Vitals are 3 new measurements that Google have come up with to measure what they call page experience. So there is largest contentful paint, which as the name suggests is basically when's the biggest element on the page, be it the hero image, be it the text, be it the first block of text. How quickly does that get on there? And that's supposed to measure how quickly the page feels like loading. First input delay, or FID, is the forgotten middle brother, middle child, sorry. I'm a middle child, so it's okay, I'm allowed to say that. It tends not to have, it's kind of an all or nothing. Most pages don't seem to have a FID issue. The Crux data came out and said there that 89.9% of pages pass FID. So you don't see an awful lot talking about that. But whenever you do have problems, it's probably because of your JavaScript, and it is usually one of the more complicated ones to actually solve. And then cumulative layout shift, or CLS. If FID is the forgotten middle child, then CLS is the crazy uncle. CLS is the metric that kind of measures as things move around. You know, you're reading a BuzzFeed article, and as you're scrolling down and new ads coming in, the text is going all over the place, pictures loading, you lose your place, you have to do that. I think it's one of the most interesting metrics there. But yeah, so these 3 measures are supposed to measure how the page is experienced, particularly in forms of performance. Each of them have a good metric, a good measurement, and it needs improvement measurement, and anything above that is poor. So LCP, for example, if you get under 2.5 seconds, so from 2.5 seconds of typing that URL in and hitting go, if the LCP content is on page, then you're marked as having passed the LCP Core Web Vital. If it's between 2.5 and 4 seconds, then you're doing not bad, but it needs some improvement. And if it's more than 4 seconds, then you're being marked as poor for that metric. As there's 3 metrics, you need to pass all 3 to get the complete good passing of Core Web Vitals. And the reason it's getting so much attention is that Google have announced that there's going to be a ranking impact of this. How much remains to be seen, and as always, your content is more important than exactly how it loads. No one's going to come along to a page with useless or boring or bad or irrelevant content, no matter how fast it loads. But it has got a lot of people interested in looking to optimize their page to make sure they get the best experience there. On this, the way it's measured is much more interesting, or is very interesting, and that's what I want to talk about here. And this next slide is going to be the biggest slide and the biggest takeaway that you can take from this presentation. So if you only take one thing away from that, it's this next slide. I think will make it more, will make you realize how the Core Web Vitals are measured. And that is the fact that is all about the RUM, about the RUM, about the RUM. Yep, I'm not afraid to use dated pop culture metrics to get my point across. So RUM, or real user metrics, basically means how people are experiencing your website in the field. Nothing to do with the drink, despite this presentation. I just like alcohol. But what they're doing is they're measuring how people are doing that. How they're doing that, we'll talk about later on there. But it is a mindset shift from the way that many of us measured in the past. Many of us have used tools like Lighthouse. You plug it in there, it goes and artificially runs your website on its own Chrome browser in a specific set of criteria and network conditions, and comes back with scores and it looks good and all that. In the real world, lots of things change. Page sizes, they have different network conditions, they have other things running on their the computer, taking up CPU. There's lots and lots of changes going on there. That makes the data much more interesting and much more noisy and much more but also much more relevant, because that is actually what the page experience. Who cares if you're getting 100 in a Lighthouse test if most of your users aren't getting that? Most of your users are experiencing much worse conditions. So, as I say, this is very, very important to the whole way that Core Web Vitals works and how it's measured. And I think that's one of the biggest misunderstandings, misconceptions, or confusions on there. People are plugging it into the tools they're used to. They're coming up with the Lighthouse score and saying, it looks great, what's the problem? Why am I not passing? And they don't understand that there's 2 different ways of measuring this. I think prior to this, RUM or field data was used a lot by certain companies, but it was kind of a specialist or niche topic, and it was sometimes quite expensive to set these up and buy these products to track your RUM. Whereas the Core Web Vitals kind of in a way democratized it and given everyone free RUM just automatically by looking at it. So how do you measure your Core Web Vitals? I think one of the best tools for getting a quick summary is Page Speed Insights. So this is a tool that I'm sure many of you have used before and are more than familiar with. Just move this toolbar a little bit, it's quite annoying. But I think there's a lot in this, and I think there's a lot in this to do with Core Web Vitals. So I do want to spend a bit of time here going through it and making sure that you're all aware of all the features in this. I mean, for such a seemingly simple tool, you type the URL in here, you hit analyze, it comes back with a reported result. I honestly don't think there's a pixel wasted on the screen for this tool, and there's so much data that you can get out of it. So as I say, for those that haven't used it, you literally put your URL in, you hit analyze, and it'll come back. And some of the things that, just to make sure you're all aware of them, the first big difference that this tool gives that many don't is it gives you mobile and desktop together. If you use web.dev/measure or page web page insight, you usually choose one or the other, or it runs one only. Page Speed Insight will give you both, because Google is measuring both, and we'll come back to that later, exactly how you can see those. So that seemingly simple tab selector at the top allows you to see mobile and then quickly flip over and see the exact same results for your desktop thing. So to me, that's a really powerful thing and something that more tools should do. Now, I'm sure Tim's going to talk about how it's not that simple a world there whenever he comes to his talk, but in general, mobile and desktop are very, very different. You know, your LCP element's going to be different because you get a smaller screen size and what you do, what you see there. Next on down is your Lighthouse score. So this is the big highlight number, and we've all in the web performance community talked about getting that 100, that magic 100 on there. To me, that seems to have taken a little bit of a backseat now. It is all about the RUM, as I said, and the field data is more important. I suspect we'll see a little bit of a reorg here in PageSpeed Insight, and this might move down closer to the lab metrics. At the minute, it's kind of the big thing you see in Page, whereas what you really are interested in is this field data down below here. So this field data shows the 3 core web vitals. They've got the blue flag. Weirdly, and I don't quite agree with this, is they also show an additional 4th metric there, first contentful paint. It doesn't impact as much in the core web vitals. So you can see here this page passes the core web vitals despite having a red 2.1 number for the first contentful paint and failing that one. That's not unusual to see. Quite often the FCP is more difficult to measure there. That's whenever you get your first meaningful paint, so not just a background color, but a menu or something there. It might not be your largest contentful paint, but it's the first bit of real content on there. A lot of the optimizations that you can do for largest contentful paint or FID or CLS can actually have a negative impact on FCP. So again, as I say, it's not unusual to see that one taking a bit of a hint. And if that does become more important, I think that will be interesting for us in the web performance community and how we optimize for that without impacting the other 3. That's one of the most important things that you get out of PageSpeed Insight, and a lot of other tools, Web Page Test, SpeedCurve, all those other ones have now started including this field data in there as well. And later on, we'll talk about where that field data comes from. The other thing is that this is also shows, oh, sorry, yeah, this is all about the RUM, and that field data is your RUM. That is your real user metrics coming in there. The other thing you get is your origin summary. So that field data above is for that URL I've typed in, which is my Smashing Magazine article. If you click that blue box, or if your URL doesn't have enough field data there, you will see the origin summary. Now, the origin summary means all the pages for smashingmagazine.com, and you'll see them all grouped together, and you'll get one set of field data for those. So while it's useful to see one page, and people quite often type in the home page, what's sometimes very useful is actually see, okay, how's my whole site performing at it? My home page is super optimized and looks great and it loads really fast. When you click on that and suddenly you realize you're failing your core web vitals for everything else, and that's where it gets really interesting. That's where you can see this very quickly, very easily. Moving on further down, you get the lab data. This, as I say, is what a lot of us have concentrated on in the past, and that's what makes up that big score, the amber 80 I had, or the green 100 that you can aspire to. It is 6 metrics, and they are weighted, and there's a section beneath it, there that shows exactly how they're weighted there. Again, as I say, it is all about the RUM. This is slightly less important there, but this is what you can use to actually measure what, to correlate what you're seeing in your tests versus what people are seeing in their field data there. So if you're seeing a bad CLS in your field data and you see a bad CLS in your lab data, that's great. You fix that, you're most likely going to fix it into the field data, or at least make a significant dent in it. If they're different, that's okay. It's understandable. They're measuring very different things. The lab data does a very quick, simple, clean load of the page and then stops. Your users don't do that. Your users scroll down, your users interact, your users click on pop-ups and get cookie notices that maybe the lab thing doesn't, or don't get cookie notices because they've accepted them in a previous session. They get different things there. So don't be surprised that you see things different. And it is something that's very important to understand, and as I say, catches people out. They're like, I get great core web vital scores in my lab data and PageSpeed Insight. Why is Google reporting it wrong? They're not reporting it wrong. That is the real data. It's just not for the simple load that PageSpeed Insight does. Moving down to say there's links to the calculator. You can see that whenever the new version of Lighthouse is released. I remember when Lighthouse 7 was released last year, people were always looking at those numbers and seeing how they were changing and stuff like that. As I say, I think that's less important now than the core web vital, than the field data. But it is still interesting to see which of these Google sees as more important, because that's probably an early indication of what's going to happen into the field data measures going on. Below that, you see a film strip, you see it loading. This is a very well optimized page. So, you know, it's pretty much there on the first couple of frames. Then you see, you can probably just make out a green box there. That's the cookie banner popping up there. But you don't see a lot of things shifting around. Another page, you might see different content coming at a different point. You might see the image moving down as a banner pops up in there. So again, very useful information just to get a quick summary of what's going on there. Moving on again, we've got opportunities. So these are optimizations you can do and an estimated saving of it. So if you removed some unused JavaScript, so Lighthouse has done a detection of what JavaScript's used. Again, it's important to realize it's only what JavaScript is used on page load. It doesn't realize what other things you can use when you click a button or whatever. So if you remove that unused JavaScript, it reckons you would save 0.3 seconds. If you removed all the JavaScript, you probably save more. But anyway, that's probably an argument I don't really got to get into right now. Further on down, there's your diagnostics. So these ones don't have, I think the main difference between these and the opportunities is these don't have a direct impact on the number of seconds that you're going to save in each of these. But again, they're all useful bits of advice on how you could optimize your website. Not all of it you should take, you should go ahead and do. Some of it you might be happy with, you might be comfortable that there's an excessive DOM size. This is just a big page. There is an impact to that performance side, and if you want to optimize it, there's something you should look at. But if you're comfortable with it, these aren't mandated things. They don't affect your score. They're just things that saying, hey, these are things we found that may make it better. And I want to zone in on two of them. So these ones are for a relatively new PageSpeed Insight. So largest contentful paint element. If you click on that, it will show you your largest contentful paint element. So there's actually a screenshot in there, and you can see it's highlighted this little bit of text here, which is that text there of my bio, and it's saying that is what the LCP element is on this page, and that is what your 2.5 seconds is being measured against. And again, I don't want to overplay this or overstress it, but it is all about the RUM. So what you're seeing here is what PageSpeed Insight got there. It's not necessarily what your real users are seeing. Again, bigger mobile screens, phablets, tablets, up to desktop, they're going to see different things. They're going to get more of the text of the article down below. Maybe one of those will be picked as an LCP element. So while this is a good indicator of what probably is it, and LCP is normally not too far away, again, depending on screen size of what the real one is. CLS is much more different. But do remember, this is PageSpeed Insight's view. It's not necessarily what everyone's view is, and therefore it's not necessarily what's being reflected in your Core Web Vitals. But it can be very interesting. For example, if I can just take a bit of a detour, I actually was working with Smashing Magazine and helped them optimize this page a little bit. So in some cases, we were seeing the author image was being selected as the LCP. That takes a little bit longer to come in because it was another request. We had to go and get the image, and they actually host their image on an image CDN. So it's not even on, they have to make that connection, do the HTTPS connection, the TCP lookup, the DNS lookup, all of those, and then get the image down. They looked to inline a very small version in the AVIF format there to fix that, which made it better, but it still takes a little bit longer than pure text to go. In other cases, they were seeing the cookie notice. PageSpeed Insight here didn't pick it up because it comes in a few seconds afterwards and it's probably stopped, but they did notice whenever they ran it on other cases. And again, it depends on the size of the article and the size of the author's bio and that sort of thing. But the cookie notice was being picked up. That does come in later on this page. You load the page, it gives you a couple of seconds, then it pops up with the cookie notice rather than blocking the whole page or going in your face. But that's a struggle then for LCP, because you want to get under the 2.5 seconds, and there's probably an artificial delay here where we don't show it there. So if that's picked as your LCP element, then yeah, you're going to feel it, and you're going to have to think of how you're going to manage that. But both of these things are coming in late, and both of these things are causing problems. And we, as I say, we spent time optimizing that image, and we talked to Vertilli at Smashing about whether we should look at the JavaScript to fix the cookies. But there was a better answer on that. What is the most important thing on this page? It's honestly not my very ugly profile picture here. What you really wanted was the title. The title wasn't showing on mobile. And once we put that in there, that was picked as the LCP element. And that is drawn a lot quicker than the image on or the cookie banner. Now, there's a fancy font there, and sometimes it gets affected there. But again, depending how you come to the page, whether you've got it cached, whether you come from the home page, whether you come from another article, that's what it's showing. So I think this really is a great example of how the core web vitals are highlighting an issue, and you can go ahead and try and fix that issue, or you can take a step back and say, are we fixing the right thing? Because to me, having that text on there, it draws faster, and it's what the user wants. It would be wrong to try and optimize those other things and get them faster, because the title is what you want there. It's highlighted a UX problem on the page there that was very easily fixed and didn't require a huge amount of optimization, fixing your cookie banner JavaScript to come in faster or anything like that. So you've always got to say, look at what your LCP element is and saying, is that what I think is the most important thing on the page? And if it's not, what can you do about that? Do you need to make the font slightly bigger? Do you need to change it? There is other things you can do. You don't just need to optimize that thing. So again, I think PageSpeed Insight and other tools highlighting those things is very useful. Similarly, there's the avoid layout shifts diagnostic. And when you click on that, it will tell you all your layout shift. Now, cumulative layout shift, I didn't touch on this earlier, but it's cumulative. It will measure several layout shifts together, add them up and give you your total score. Here we've got two things, a link to my bio and then also the title. Each of them have got very, very small CLSs, 0.0001, and the good capping is 0.1, so we're way off that. These things, whenever you see the 0.01s, it's usually web fonts coming in late, so it draws it in the initial text format and then shifts slightly as the fancy font comes in. But again, it shows you these ones coming in. You can also see that film strip, as I said, loading. You can see things moving around there and do it. Now, my one gripe, well, one of my gripes with PageSpeed Insight is the film strip is a little bit pixely. I don't know whether you can see that, probably not over video at home, but it's not the highest resolution whenever you're trying to actually scroll and have a look and do that. So pro tip there, web page tests is fantastic for this. It's a little bit more complicated than PageSpeed Insight. Type it. In theory, it's the same. You type the URL in and you hit go, but there's an awful lot more options in there to do that. But one of my favorite things about it is the film strip. It will show you, and they've recently added extra large film strips, and you can go in there and you can really actually see the detail. You can click and highlight which are your LCP elements, which are your CLS elements. You can load two tests and compare them. You can create an animated GIF version and download to actually see it loaded. So yeah, if you're doing a lot with film strips, web page test is where you're going. But, and again, I'm going to labor the point in that it's all about the RUM. These film strips are produced through lab data. They're running the test, they're taking a snapshot every couple of seconds or every couple of milliseconds and producing all the changes that we're showing there. They might be measuring the wrong thing because, again, your users might not be seeing this same thing. So the good advice and the good starting point to go there, but don't think just by fixing that and getting your 100 score in Lighthouse, you're actually going to fix the issue. And then finally, before I move on to this ode to web page insight, this little thing at the bottom, again, I don't know if people notice that or they care about it or they think it's basically a little copyright notice, but during that, it will tell you what version of Lighthouse is run and, more importantly, what version of Chrome is run. Why is that important? Because the core web vitals are evolving. They're constantly changing. There's been a lot of bug fixes and a lot of hard work by the Chrome team going on there. We see there that Lighthouse is running version 88 of Chrome and has been for a little bit while. And version 89 of Chrome and version 90 of Chrome, which is probably what most of your users are running, because most of Chrome auto updates in there, they've had a lot of fixes, particularly to CLS. There was a lot of invisible CLS that can't be explained. So sometimes you stick a URL in PageSpeed Insight, and even on the lab data, it says you've CLS, but you can't repeat it yourself, or you stick it in web page test, which keeps its Chrome up to date, and again, it can't repeat it itself. This may be one of the reasons why. I think it will settle down. I think there's a few more changes to come. There's a big redefinition of CLS coming up. But in general, yeah, if you're seeing something that you can't explain or can't repeat in year one, it's worth having a quick look and seeing what version of PageSpeed Insight is being run there. Okay, moving on. Right, so I think that was a bit of a recap there on the web performance side, and hopefully you've learned a couple of extra tips and tricks that you can get through PageSpeed Insight. But we're now going to enter the weird, murky world of search engine optimization. Ooh. So, the reason Core Web Vitals is getting such such a amount of press and media at the moment is the SEO ranking factor that you're getting through it. So how can we see that? For a start, there is a tool called Google Search Console that Google makes available for free. It's mostly used by SEO people before, so a lot of you might not use it or might not have an account. Get yourself access to that. If you're trying to optimize Core Web Vitals for your website, have a look at that. This is Google's view of what they think your website is acting like. And they have a Web Vitals, Core Web Vitals report, which I've shown here, which shows all your URLs. So there's like 429 URLs here, and they're saying 424 are good. Woohoo! And 5 need improvement. That's all right there. It also shows the history of the last 90 days of what they sold there. So you can go in there and get a bird's eye view of what Google thinks of your website. And where do they get this data from? At the top there, you see the source is Chrome UX report. There's several issues because I don't think the source is quite that, which we'll get to. And I went with a bit of a Twitter rant a couple of days ago. But that's where it's getting the ultimate data from, even if it's not presenting it in the exact same way. So the Chrome User Experience Report, or Crux, and yes, I know Chrome User Experience Report doesn't make up the letters Crux, but that's the acronym they've chosen. I think CUR doesn't work very well, or CUX or something. So yeah, you'll hear a lot about Crux whenever you're hearing about Core Web Vitals. This is a report that we'll talk about in a minute of where that data comes from, but that is where Google is getting the information from. This RUM data is coming from. The URLs are listed by mobile and desktop. So I just showed a mobile report here. Just beneath it, just off screen, there is a desktop equivalent of that. Initially, only mobile is in scope for the ranking impact, but desktop will follow. It was just announced in Google I/O this week that desktop is coming. They haven't set a date for it. But if you've been busy, optimizing your mobile and ignoring desktop, now is the time to start looking at that desktop as well. In that, if you click, sorry, just go back here. If you click on that open report, it will allow you to select any of these three, the poor, the needs improvement, or the good URLs, and it will give you some sample URLs for each of those. It will also try and group them together. That grouping is another bit of SEO voodoo that isn't exactly clear. It's definitely grouped by the Core Web Vitals. So you see these pages are all failing CLS, and you can go in there and you get a sample of pages. And if lots of pages are failing for the same sort of thing, it makes sense to group them together. Some bigger sites also see it grouped by URL pattern. Your products might be grouped together, or other things like that. Another important thing is Google Search Console will show URLs that are not in Crux. You can query Crux directly, but I think people will be very surprised to see how few of their URLs in Crux. Typically, what I've seen is, it's less than 5% of pages in there. Now, I don't work in the Amazons of the world that have an awful lot of traffic, but I do work in some high traffic, fairly big sites there. And in that example there, this is from my work site, health insurance company in Ireland. We have 429 URLs. When I queried all of them in Crux, only about 30 actually appeared in Crux. So how is Google Search Console figuring out a Core Web Vitals score for the rest? I think that's a very interesting question. It's one I wish there was a bit more transparency about. To me, it was based on origin, at least in part. So we actually had one really popular page that was really bad CLS. It was an internally logged in page. We weren't thinking about it in SEO terms or in terms of ranking, because it was not on there because it was an internal site. But it was pulling down. It was so well visited. It was pulling down the Core Web Vital scores for all the other pages, and for the origin, and therefore for all the other pages. As soon as we fixed that, a good bit, once that ticked through and got there, suddenly all the other pages did it. So it needs to figure out and try and guess the URLs that are missing to try and give you that graph. And say I'd like a bit more transparency on that. Did I miss a page there? Yeah, so the Crux, it is based on the real user experience. So the way that happens is they collect a load of data from Chrome users there. So whenever you install Chrome, it says, are you happy to share data with Google? And if you hit yes, you'll be opted into Crux. It will gather all those every single page you're going on there. It doesn't talk back immediately. I think it groups it up every so often, so it's it's not slowing down your web browsing. But it will feed back data to Google saying anonymized data there, saying yep, this page loads very quick, this page loads slow, this page there, and so on. And then Google gets that from billions of users, gathers it all up. They look at the 28th day and they look at the 75th percentile users. We'll come back to that. That is very important and very misunderstood. It is Chrome only, so your Firefox users aren't being included this, your Safari users aren't being included this. It's only looking at Chrome. Your Edge isn't being used in this, even though it's the same Chromium browser. It is only Chrome. This does mean that you can optimize for Chrome, and I don't like that too much. Like Chrome is the only browser that supports AVIF at the moment. The Firefox is coming. Safari doesn't support native lazy loading yet. It does, they just haven't switched it on, but hopefully soon they'll switch it on there. So you do have to ask, yeah, what can you do there? I say I'm a bit iffy about this. I don't like the fact that we're kind of, Google's telling us, well, not telling us, but indirectly telling us that if we optimize for their browser, then we'll get all these goodies. So a bit interesting. And it's not all Chrome users. To say you have to be opted in, you have to have syncing set up, you have to have usage status reports going there. That's the official definition there. The other thing is no index and logged in pages count. So even though they're not showing in Google search, those pages are still feeding back data, and you can query it about Crux. That's one reason why they don't always make it as easy to get the Crux data unless you know the exact URL. They don't want people going in and saying, show me all the URLs for a domain, and you see all these other hidden URLs that you're not supposed to see. So that 28th day percentile, or what we call P75 sometimes, it is the highest Core Web Vitals score, 75% of your page views, or 3/4 of your users got. So what's the worst score of 3/4 of your best users? Or what's the lowest Core Web Vitals score you got that would suddenly include 75% of your page views? So it's not the average of these 75% page views, but it's the worst value for at least 3/4 of your users. And yes, I fully get the arrogance of quoting yourself in your own presentation, but that's a quote from the article there. So let's look at an example of that, because this is quite interesting. Let's say you had a really bad LCP of 10 seconds. It was a huge image. It was print quality. You hadn't optimized it for the web at all. It took 10 seconds to download. And let's say you realized that, you highlighted it, made PageSpeed Interact told it, you ran it through a quick tool, and you got it down to much smaller, and you put it on there, and then when you rerun the thing, it's down to a second for all users. When will that change show up in Crux? And it's not going to show up immediately. So if on day one, so assume all before day 0, it was all 10 seconds, 10 seconds, 10 seconds. And day 1, it's like 1 second, 1 second, 1 second. If you ran PageSpeed Interact every day, it would do that. Your 28-day mean, which is what most of us are used to as average, if you took that, it would slowly tick down. If you're taking the 28-day average over that, you would see it going down from 10 to 9.8, 9.6, blah, 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 and eventually reaching down to the 1. So that's what people normally think of whenever they mean averages if you're not a statistician. The P75 is much more different, because on day 1, more than 75% of your users over the last 28 days got that 10 score. On day 2, still more than 75% of your users got that 10 score, and so on and so forth. It's only around day 22, and this is a very simplified example, by the way, so you will see some drop down. But this pure example, it's only about day 22, which by no coincidence is 75% through the 28-day runtime, will you actually suddenly see a massive shift down. So I think it's very important to realize that P75 is very different to mean than the average that most of us are used to dealing with. The reason we use it is it reduces variance. There's an awful lot of outliers out there. People connecting from Australia, people with really... I don't have an answer for that. Oh, sorry. People who have very bad broadband or whatever, it tries to get rid of that. People are just having an off day on their internet. So ROM data is messy, so it tries to cut out that and say, look, we'll get rid of the extremes and say, what did 3/4 of your users get or better? So that's good, but it is frustratingly slow to update. And we'll come back to how we can make that better in a minute. So it's not unusual to see this in your Google Search Console graph, where everything's sitting there and it's an amber and amber and amber. Suddenly, whoa, everything goes great. And you're like, oh my God, what did we do yesterday? That was great. And it's probably just you filtered out all those things, and suddenly you're getting everyone using your new thing. So I'd say that might be 28, 22, 23, 24, 28 days later. It's also not unusual to see this, where you've fixed a really bad LCP, and you suddenly went through there, and then suddenly everything went to amber as we filtered out a lot of those extremes, but not all of them. And then suddenly everything suddenly flipped to green a few days later, even though you haven't made any changes in there. And then occasionally you see this sort of craziness where that usually means you're on borderline there, and you're in, you're out, you're in, you're out. It's flicking back and forth. You kind of want to be a good bit under if you can, just to stop that sort of variance there. But yeah, those graphs take a while to come through. And I say it's very frustrating as users. So we are used to, as developers, we've got these nice feedback loops. We've got all these DevOps pipelines. You know, you run something through, you run a page test, and it comes back and tells you whether it's fixed or not. So how can we make Crux, the feedback, loop faster? Because doing a fix, waiting 28 days, and then going, oh, only half fixed it. Okay, we need to do something more. Let's get the team together, and then we fix it again, and then we sit back and go 28 days, or we do some other work. That's no good. You can't work with that. It's just absolutely crazy. So let's go back to PageSpeed Insight. So let's look at our field data here. And on this one, we can see it does not pass the Core Web Vitals assessment, this page. We can see the reason it doesn't, ignoring the FCP, say it's not part of Core Web Vitals, is this little red mark here. So we're coming to layout shift on 0.11. We need to be 0.1 or under. What else can we see from this? So these bars below that can often be missed are actually quite useful to measure this. We can see that 73% of our users got a good LCP, so must have got 0.1 or beneath. That's very close to the 75% magic number that we need. So if you run PageSpeed Insight over a number of days, and if you came back tomorrow and it was 74%, then whoa, you know you're on the right track. And then a few days later, if you run it again at 75%, bingo, you're there. Now, typing that into the URL and running it isn't the most exciting thing. So I've been guilty of doing that myself. So Crux actually is an API that you can register. You can use curl or whatever your API testing tool of choice is. You do need an API key. They're just for rate limiting. It's free. You can register for that online and just Google Crux API and it's there. You make a simple HTTP request there for either the origin you want or the URL you want. You can set this up and automate it to run every day. There's even a Google Sheets version where it can run in the background and get all your URLs that you want. It will come back with a big blob of JSON, including each of the Core Web Vitals. This is cumulative layout shift, and you can see the 3 buckets. And most importantly, you can see there that density. Now this one's well passing, it's 86% or up, but it is to a very, 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 very minute degree there. That means you can track it over things. You might not see a percentage move every day, but you're certainly going to see an impact from this. So after you make your change, can you see that ticking up, in which case you're on the right track, or is it not moving at all, or is it ticking down, in which case you've got a problem? You can then plot it. This is what I did actually with my work website, is I just ran that script every day, plotted it in Google Sheets, and then I can actually see it very quickly. I could see the green line trending upwards. I could see the red line trending downwards. I knew that I was on the right track, and I was able to estimate exactly to the day of when I would pass the Core Web Vitals. I stuck it on that the web performance Slack site. Today's the day I'm going to pass. I'm just waiting for it to come in, and then a few hours later, the data came in, and I'd gone all green in my Google Search Console graph, and I was delighted. So you can measure when it's going to happen. You don't just need to sit there and wait for 28 days. So that's one way you can make the Crux data more useful to you and try and get faster feedback of that. There is alternative RUM solutions. I recommend the Cuba Libre, but back to the web performance, there's other tools out there because it is very much all about the RUM. Google have also released a Web Vitals JavaScript library. This is, now, I hear you, we'll probably cause some of these problems by adding too much JavaScript, and here's Barry suggesting I add some more. This is actually a very small library. It's about 1.75 kilobytes. I'm loading it from unpackage.com. And then a little bit of extra just to send it to Google Analytics is what I'm doing. So you can get these things, send it back to Google Analytics, and boom, you've just made yourself a free RUM product. You're just getting data on all your pages and all your visitors, users there. That means you can slice and dice it as you can see it. What about returning visitors? What about people who convert? What about people who don't? Can we see what user, what version of browsers they're using? Are people in the newer Chrome with those CLS fixes getting smaller CLS than people in the older Chrome? It's very, very useful to do that. They also released a Web Vitals dashboard, and it will you can connect it up to your Google Analytics if you send it in the GAT, and it will suck the data out and gives various graphs there. You can slice and dice it, as I say, by desktop, by mobile traffic. It will do that P75 calculation because all the data is going into Google Analytics for you. Very easy to set up, very free, and it can see instant feedback. So this, I released a CLS fix, and I went in to have a look at the run data the next day, and I could see this massive drop off there. I knew I'd done right. Okay, it was going to be 28 days until I saw it in the Google Search Console, until Google recognized me. But I could quite happily go, okay, that's done, move on. And you know, once I've filtered that URL and seen that drop off, it can also, the bit more JavaScript, feedback each of the items there. You know, the LCP candidates. You can go in there and see, okay, this one, for example, is carousel. So we can see the carousels, the LCP candidate, they're all passing, all green here, that's great. But if one was failing, and we can go in there and say, okay, why is that one slower to load? Okay, it depends on XYZ, and you can debug there. And again, this is RUM, this is real data. These are what people are seeing there. It's not what some tool under very static conditions is seeing, it's what people are seeing in the real life there. If you want to take it further, again, Google I/O was on this week. There's a great talk there by Phil Walton about measuring, debugging this, using that script, feeding it up into BigQuery, doing some slicing and dicing. It's a little complicated, I think, to set up there, but again, you can set that up if you want to, if you really want to drill into your data. Or there's lots of RUM providers on the market there. And I speak to a lot of these people. There's some very smart people who are very engaged in the performance on this. Some of them do cost, yeah, and some of them aren't cheap, but they will do all that for you and give you your data and allow you to see there and not make you wait in the 28-day thing, which, as I say, just isn't the best way of doing it. Okay, I think I probably went well over time there, but thanks very much for listening. I've been Barry Pollard. There's slides are available for downloading there. And as I say, reach out to me. I'll be around the chat here for a bit, or those other ways of ways of getting hold of me.